Thank you everyone for your patience. Sorry we're starting a little bit late today. Appreciate you being here. Welcome to the PNCA Design Panel Series 2021. This is our third panel this semester. We have one more after this. Really excited for our guest today. Nishat is a spectacular human that inspires me constantly. And I'm just feel really lucky to have her here today and just in the Portland scene. I'm not going to do a proper introduction. I love Nishat and I'm really happy to have her here. But my name is Bijan Barahimi. I'm adjunct faculty at PNCA in the graphic design program. I also run a studio called Fisk in Portland, and we co-host this panel series along with PNCA. And it's been a really fun thing that we've kind of transitioned with COVID to doing this over Zoom and trying to find a kind of more human way to approach a traditional lecture series by having it be more panel-based and including students and outside professionals and faculty, and also with the kind of dialogue between the public. So just to explain kind of run a show a little bit, we'll do some quick introductions of the panel, and then a student will ask a kickoff question to Nishat, and we'll keep it within the panel for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then the last 20 minutes, we'll open it up to the public to ask questions. So if you raise your hand, we can promote you and you can ask a question over video. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can just submit a question through the Q&A text panel, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. We will be ending right at 1:30. So we have about 50 minutes, which I think should be plenty. That's it. I'm going to pass it off to Jacob to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Jawahir. I'm a fourth year graphic design student here at PNCA. I'm really interested in experimental typography and interaction design, so I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Humaira. I am a master's in design system student at PNCA. I have a bachelor's in architecture and I'm transitioning into the UX design world. So I'm really excited to talk to Nishat and, get to know her more. Yeah.
I'll make a little thank you before we let other folks introduce themselves. I want to thank our tech folks, Effie, for representing and hosting and supporting in case anything goes wrong. She and the rest of the team has gotten really good at figuring it out on the fly. And so if anything comes up, thank you for that. Big thanks to Chelsea, who is our department assistant and has been doing that for many years and working with thesis students, interacting with the public in these panels and just generally supporting. And I'll let Kendall introduce himself, but big thanks to Kendall for being our co-host from across the country.
Yeah, my name's Kendall. I'm actually in LA right now, so on this side of the country. Good friend of Bijan's and Nishat's, and happen to just always pop in and stir up questions.
So glad for it. I'll do a little intro here, although probably most folks here are here because you're excited to talk with Nishat and just learn more. Nishat is a practicing artist, creative director, and associate VP of creative at Instrument. I know her not only as that, but as an illustrator and as a funny and awesome human who I love talking to about everything from complaints to excitement with much exaggerated gestures in person and on screen. So I'm just glad to get to reconnect a little bit at a time that it's kind of hard to do that. And to have this excuse to do it in a more casual way is amazing. Nishat's work is really multifaceted and varied, ranges from illustration and brand design to interactive projects and experimental sprints. Her client list is long and wonderful, but she's also an experienced educator, has taught at PSU and mentored, frequent guest to our midterm critiques in design and illustration for thesis, And she's I think enjoyed sharing her artwork globally through exhibitions and lectures and workshops from New York to Japan, and is really actively involved in equity and inclusion work in the community and in her work community. And I love the fluidity and how she brings all these passions into her work. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to turn it over to Humaira for the first question here.
Yeah, and this is kind of like a basic origin story question. What I wanted to ask how you got into the design world. And yeah, a little bit of background.
Sure. Wow. Thank you for that incredible intro. Also, I wish Christina could just bring you around with me for that pump up every day. That's awesome. How did I get started in design? I mean, I'm like 100 years old, so it was a long time ago. I studied design at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And fun fact, I didn't start as a design major. I started as a fashion major. I was waiting for Kendall's face on that. I started as a fashion major. I, was into sewing, and I was interested in how art influenced fashion and how fashion influenced culture. That was very interesting to me, and I wanted to study that. And after about a year of studying it at, great design university, I realized I just really did not like that industry at all. There were so many challenges within that industry in terms of like specific beauty standard, racism, like so many challenges that I just was like, they felt insurmountable. And, this is 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. And I switched to graphic design and communication design because I felt that, graphic design is still a manner in which you can have art influence your practice to then speak to many people, to influence culture, news, people in general. So that's how I got started. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, Nishat, I wanted to just like piggyback on that. Like, do you think you could talk a little bit about your transition to your current position? And like, because for me, that was like really unexpected when that happened. Not this recent thing, but like, I mean, just generally transitioning to a full-time job. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about like, your like career path, I guess, because I know you spent a lot of time freelancing, and I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of time to cover in the story, and I'll try to keep it to the most salient point. I think I have worked in lots of jobs full time, and then often intermittently freelanced for, a couple years here and there, and then ended up somewhere else full time. And that process of almost like leapfrogging from let's call like these full-time jobs sort of stones on the river, and then the freelance is like the hopping in between, splashing in the water. And I think that freelance time often has been a recalibration in terms of what is the work that I want to be doing, because graphic design is a service-based industry. We're servicing clients. And deep down in my heart, I know that I'm so much of a artist and I want to do my own thing and I have my own points of view. But when you're in service of a client, whether you're working in-house or at an agency, certainly you can put your own spin and approach on something, but there's this need that I personally have had intermittently over the course of my career to take my own time and spend time working on my own practice, whether that's my illustration or getting to really call the shots on the work that I'm taking and in the time that I've been freelancing. So, fast forward many leapfrogs and hops across many stones and rivers. I had about 5 years of freelancing that I was doing, doing some work for Nike, doing my own illustration work, taking time off, going for bike rides, having probably more time off than I was working. And then lots of people were trying to hire me and I didn't want to get hired anyway, but I did say yes to working at Instrument just about 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago. And that transition for me was a scary one. It was not something that I had planned on doing. They came to me and put this opportunity in front of me to be a creative director working on the Google business. And that was scary for me. I don't think of myself as a person in tech. I think of myself more as a people person and interested in art. And I'd spent so much time working on Nike, whether it was like at Nike or freelancing or working at Wieden & Kennedy or AKQA. I was like, I'm like sports and culture and, people, not tech and devices. But that fear and scariness actually was a wonderful moment for me to take a leap and see what that was about, to do something totally different. And it has been so rewarding in so many ways.
So it's actually interesting. Maybe this is too deep of a cut, but like Nishat also has a close place in my heart. She comes from the Philadelphia punk scene, which, you know, adding that into the mix of like where your career has like gone and come from. It was also like very surprising for us, I guess, like close friends, to see you transition into a role like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you just kind of touched on it, but is there more that you can say about, you know, the benefit of that kind of uncomfort or that uncertainty going into, you know, the transition, and why it's like, I mean, obviously now you're 3.5 years in, it's like, it's been a success, which,
Sure,
you know, is great. So
yeah, and I mean, the idea of success is also temporary. I don't think that, I mean, you can do something and accomplish something, but that doesn't mean you can sort of stand on that rock forever necessarily, or I can't, because I get, you know, I'm interested in so many things, but Instrument has offered me, you know, ways to work on different teams and different opportunities as I've been there. I think something about the like punk roots that is important just for my life and to address in the work is, oh, I'm sure so many people think about this, but you know, we're navigating being creative people working in service, that kind of starts originally from a place in our hearts of curiosity, catharsis. Like that's what creativity is for me as an illustrator. It just feels good and it's fun to draw something, and sometimes it's funny. And the fact that you know, a visualization or a composition of type and image and graphics or illustration and photography can hold a message and spread it out to so many people is really inspiring and powerful. And you know, in punk, that was so closely related to activism for me coming up as a young person. And that is still like highly generative for many people now, especially through social media, which is incredible. I think one of the tensions that I experience in my work life is really thinking about this design as service. Who are we serving and who is benefiting? I'm always asking these questions and truthfully struggling with internalized capitalism and how that has partnered with a lot of my success in the industry in general, certainly in my job. And also another thing that has contributed to my success is my willingness to be critical of everything around me. And not just accepting this is the way things are. I can understand that landscape and try to navigate it in a variety of ways. Some of that is, you know, understanding how you can wield your own power, whether that is charisma or coercion or collaboration, or I don't have like a good C word for this, or it's like cutting yourself off and doing something else. I'm kind of unafraid in that way. The thing that I'm most afraid of is becoming like a full byproduct of a system that is just regenerating the same thing over and over again.
That's such an interesting like space, because it's a fluid space. It's not like you're defined by where you're working or the moment that you're in. You're almost, and you're not quite defining yourself against it too, which like for me as a former, like, I guess I don't know, what is that, as a punk myself, I feel like so much of my early career was spent like defining myself against something else. And so I appreciate the nuance like in your answer of like becoming a part of these spaces and then also defining yourself against it, and eventually hopefully maybe like setting yourself free from that, whatever that looks like, if you really are able to do that. I'm curious like about how your outside design practice and creative practice like is fed by that opposition of this service industry. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, you know, I was having a really interesting conversation it's not even just about me so much as it is about how like one who has their own art practice or, then does design as service, and what the tension and relationship those things can be to each other, whether it is opposition or actually entanglement, because one sometimes can't survive without the other. It's like being the sugar mama you want to see in the world to yourself for your own practice. I think that that's like certainly a way that I have like my two practices coexist with each other. Doing my own work, like doing illustration or doing art or doing anything that is not related to working for a massive client in my every single day is so essential just to refresh the conceptual and creative and cathartic mind. There's so many C words. Because otherwise I find that I'll like just be getting so drilled down into the formulas and processes of, a need of someone else. But the creativity for myself of just being playful and drawing in my sketchbook or drawing something, even doing like a editorial illustration for the Times is like extremely freeing. There's a lot of autonomy in that space where there may not be a lot of autonomy when you're working on a, global brand campaign or project or product. Did that answer your question? I'm really just.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think it's a little different for everybody, right? But like the fact that they're entangled for you, I think.
Yeah, the thing. Yeah, I just remembered. So this conversation that we were having was that I was having with my sort of like other half at work, Celie Pines, was there's this Ouroboros, of like, well, we do the work in like the big client space in order to have a brand feel like trustworthy, trusted, like graphic design is this arbiter of trust. And so if you're servicing a massive client, the client is therefore like becoming more trustworthy with their audience. And also you are becoming more trustworthy with your industry. And if your work is, if like my personal work is made to just be a self-expression so that I can just trust my own creative sense, there's this really, snake eating its tail Ouroboros of all of those things and its interconnectedness that's actually quite cyclical. And on an industry level, when we think about brands that are, borrowing from street culture or punk culture or activism, like they wanting to represent these human stories and taking from them, and trying to like appear really authentic. There's this interesting thing where the folks that are on the ground, like being, living their authentic lives and making their artwork, also often have to try to appear to, be, valid with these trustworthy sort of professional looking carousels and statements on their Instagram. So you can see how these things get interrelated and almost confused, and one borrows from the other and one sort of survives from the other. And in my, early years, the concepts of like activism, art, illustration, sort of rawness and authenticity was very separate from like the professional world. And as those two things today have come so closely together, for me, it's really empowering to be able to have conversations from an honest place. And it's also disorienting because I think we have to be real about what our expectations are for what can actually be dismantled in a capitalist and white supremacist system in which we live, where graphic design is an arbiter of trust. So when you see two buildings that are businesses and one is designed in a more like way that makes you feel comfortable, professional, beautiful, like what does that mean that we are buying into this idea that design is, that beauty makes a business more worthwhile, that professionalism makes a business more worthwhile. And so as I'm like now having these two worlds starting to come together more, I think that there's just really big questions. I know this wasn't your question, but I just want to go there.
It's super interesting. It's funny. I was just thinking about this last night, actually. Kendall shared a podcast with me maybe a month or two ago, but it was interview with this author who just published a book. I think it was called like The Me Generation or something like that. It was just talking about how we live in this world right now where it's much more about us as individuals versus like previous to the 90s. It was much more about like collective thought and just like making decisions based on your groups. And I think it's funny that you bring up like the idea of like corporations trying to be more human, which in some ways they're trying to be more personal, because like historically companies have always been like, we're a company, we're not like a person, and we're not political, and we don't have political agendas or whatever, even though they do. But now it's like we're in this moment where we're expecting more out of like corporations, I guess, and we want them to take stances. And I'm just curious, like it just seems like a lot of things are colliding, and like you talking about that kind of made me think of that kind of dilemma. And I'm just curious, like talking about, like I feel like what is the positive and negative that we're kind of because I think this is like really actually, it's funny when you're in school, you're not thinking about this dilemma as much, you know, you're really focused on your like self-initiated projects within this framework of school. And I'm just curious, I feel like what is positive and what is negative about this change that you've seen, you know, working in the industry and then now being in this position and working with these large companies that you're providing this trust service to. It's a really interesting place to be. And I'm just curious, like how you see the benefit. And
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I have the disadvantage maybe of having so many years of baggage of living in a world where it wasn't that way. So I'm really excited for the next generation to be able to come into a lot of this with pure optimism, or more optimism. You know, when I see brands telling stories about Black mothers, brown women, Muslim women, immigrants, all these things that like are stories that, you know, are either in my community or families or that people that I can relate to, I'm very happy that that's happening. It's so positive because one should be able to see themselves or understand that it's not only yourself in this world. There's been such a monolith of, you know, who even exists in this world, whose story deserves to be told. It's so wonderful that this almost floodgate of variety of stories are being told now by brands. That is essential in terms of holding a mirror up to millions and millions of people who have not been able to sort of look at themselves and have themselves reflected through a brand. I mean, there's a bigger question of like, why the fuck do we need a brand to reflect ourselves? But that's like, I certainly can't start to scratch at that right now, but I think that it is, if that is the way, if that's like one of the main educators and nurturers of society, advertising and marketing, which makes me feel a little some things. The opportunity to be able to, or not even the opportunity, the necessity to tell more stories of different people humanizes all of us, really. So that's awesome. I love that. You know, if I was like just coming out of school, I think I would be really excited for the opportunity to know that my story and everyone's story is different. Everyone's individual story is different. People say like, oh, I never saw someone like myself. Yes, while that's probably true, you're never going to see exactly yourself unless you make your own story. So that's a huge benefit. The negative is like just interrogating why is that happening? And you know, it's for the bottom line, it's for making money, but that's what we're in right now. That's like how business works. That's how business works. That is how this country works. That is like, that's how the system works. And finding one's own balance in navigating that truth, or choosing to do it in another way is really hard because, you know, people have got like bills to pay, families to take care of, student loans, all the, you know, houses, apartments, whatever it is, health insurance. I mean, these are very real realities that put corporations in so much power in our lives. And so if there's an opportunity for an individual to benefit of the necessity of a brand to be doing something that's slightly more authentic, then that's great.
Huge question, Bij. Wonderful answer, Nishat. Covered a lot of things. But in that you mentioned the kind of confusion that comes about and the sort of disorientation that is brought on by this mixing. So I wonder, like, from the student's perspective, from Jacob and Humaria, if I'm saying that right, are you guys feeling or seeing any of that? Like, are you feeling confused? Are you feeling that like you don't understand the industry you're about to go in?
I mean, for me personally, I feel like it's changing so much, even like now, like the times we're in, and like it can get confusing, like what field do you want to go in, or like what type of work do you want to make to impact people and like be beneficial. And I feel like it's this changing element that you need to like figure out for like yourself and your work first, and like what type of designer you want to be.
And Humaria, you
Yeah.
have a bachelor's in another, field, so it's almost like you're having that question come up, right?
Yeah, I've had that question come up so many times, especially with finishing my bachelor's in architecture, where I was just like, oh, here I am working and building apartments and, contributing to the capitalistic world that we already live in. And I was just like, this is not working out for me. So then, yeah, I got into like social justice design, equity-driven design through this master's. And it's been really fulfilling, but I don't know what happens after school, right? Because here I was paying to do this work, but now you get out there, you don't get paid to do that kind of work. You have to go to like nonprofits. I feel like I've heard like that instrument has some equity driven work that comes in, but other than that, like I haven't heard many brands do that. So then again, I'm just like, oh, here I enter this world of like confusion, and like I don't really know what's gonna happen. So for sure, I'm confused.
I think that there's a lot of ways to there's so much nuance in understanding one's impact in their work. There's a lot of nuance in that, because there's all of these great big things that I've been talking about, like just need to get paid to survive, and also these companies are benefiting off of off of that. Thinking about how a brand is making its best effort to enrich a life, whether that is like Google, who is trying to make, accessibility is a massive priority for their brand in terms of interaction, or being a designer working in user experience and thinking, how am I making a user who is clicking on their phone 1,000 times a day, how am I just making that experience for them easier? Or bringing a little bit of joy into something visually. Like those are that sounds really small, but those are the kinds of things that actually have impact. Like think about when you're interacting with a website on your phone and it doesn't work well, and how annoying that friction in life is. Like good design in a way is, and you can think about this as impact that you're imparting on someone, is almost sometimes not felt, like you want to create in terms of user experience, like something that is seamless, frictionless, and therefore we're taking static out of somebody's life that is needless, just making something easier, whether it's like a checkout flow or, like organizing something on your calendar. And then in addition to that, how, principles of accessibility are like always being considered. I learned so much of that when I first came to Instrument. I never really thought about design beyond visual design, and design being visual communication, but design is actually the like organization and orchestration of information. And since what we experience so much is in, the digital space and on the internet, like the idea of design being visual is actually extremely exclusionary. And starting to understand things like that in terms of equity, and starting to understand that in terms of impact in your work, I think may seem very small, but it's actually affecting millions of people in every day. And on the other side of that, in terms of like brand storytelling and telling these authentic stories, again, we can question like, what's a brand's sort of agenda in this? But the effect and impact is something to focus on again in terms of like, what is the impact on an individual that sees something like this? Does it make a huge difference for, you know, someone to see themselves in a new way? Of course it is.
That was beautifully said.
I think it's also another benefit, as Bijan was kind of questioning or asking, that you guys are having to ask yourselves this question much earlier than I think any of us had to. I feel like I didn't start thinking about this until I was like 5-6 years into my career, and that has to, the optimism in me, which I'm also like Nishat. I feel like the optimism in me says that has to have some sort of beneficial output later on.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's become like, dare I use the word like mainstream to give a shit, is awesome. You know, there's some murky waters in that in terms of everybody's in a different place in terms of what they understand of capitalism, white supremacy, ableism, all of these things. Everyone literally is in a different place in their understanding about it, and then navigating it at work and navigating in design. I mean, there's so many different parts of that, but the more collectivist mindset right now that I think is happening in terms of justice, care, even just authenticity being an expectation in today's generations in society is pretty exciting to see. Like, what can you all stand for? What can we all stand for in our work and push for? Yeah.
Wonder, oh God. Sorry, I was just gonna open it if anyone wants to put in questions to the Q&A while we're talking.
I was just going to say that seeing the amount of care and questioning that goes into the work at the student level, I feel so lucky to get to work with these folks like so closely. It reminds me of what led to, I think, a really individualist mindset, like in the 90s when I was coming out of school and into the work world. Just kind of pushing against some of those things, but the difference does seem to be that optimism and like an earnestness. And I'm wondering, Jacob and Humera, if you feel that like authenticity and earnestness, even if you're struggling with it now, or is that something that brands are maybe putting on you or older generations are putting on you? Like, do you feel an earnest connection to your work and the questions that you're asking? It's kind of a weird question.
I feel like I'm always trying to like ask those questions just so I could like better myself and like my design and how it's going to be communicated to the rest of the world and like what type of industry I want to go to. I feel like those are like important things and like aspects to know about first, but like it is like kind of difficult, with like student projects and getting involved in like that impact of like the real world and how this project will like communicate with other people. But I think it's a really important aspect to just like sit down and think about with like how you are as a designer.
Yeah, I think similarly, I feel like a lot of the work I do, it's earnest work for sure. And I don't know if that comes from like the older generations or just in general, how the world is right now. The world is changing, and from what it was 10 years ago to now with the internet coming in and all of these movements that are happening and people asking for they're asking the real questions. And I think we are exposed to all of that, like especially the students of this year and last year. So I think that's why I feel like a lot of my cohort and everyone were asking questions that make a difference. And that is really inspiring. And I feel like everyone now is doing that kind of work, even if, how Nishat's mentioned, it's like Google or any other kind of brand, they're trying to make a difference in people's lives. So it's not just about like the looks of it. It's how can you make a difference? So yeah.
Nish, I have a question in regard to kind of what you've seen change in companies over the years, because you've seen, you know, various different like types of agencies, brands. I wonder if, you know, are you able to identify a company that's, you know, sort of doing it right? We'll say that.
You know, I think that this, things are changing always, right? Like, when we think about style and we think about what was like the style of fashion in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, we're in the 2020s now, so we don't really know. Or like, what were people wearing last year, the year before that? Things, and maybe fashion is like a very surface level example, but things are constantly changing culturally. Language is changing culturally. You know, what if you watch a movie from the 80s that was like maybe hilarious, then you watch it now and you're like, ooh, that doesn't stick. Or even like 5 years ago, it's like, I wouldn't do that. I think that the best organizations are ones that are committed to flexibility, transparency, and evolution. And, you know, last year, every company, I mean, most companies sort of got spotlighted with their pants down in a way to be like, whoops, sure didn't think about this thing, or this thing. And are all now, you know, some are scrambling and some are doing the hard earned work to make progress. So your question was, who's like doing it right? I don't know if I have an answer for that, but I can say that I think that the things to look for, like when you're out there looking for a job or talking to companies, I mean, I'm proud to say at Instrument that we have acknowledged places that we've not done right. We are transparent about things to empower individuals, like pay bands and stuff like that. So you're not navigating in the dark about how that kind of thing works. We are flexible in terms of listening to people and taking feedback and making change, and are also small enough that we can be nimble to try to instigate some of that change pretty quickly. You know, bigger companies can be just like that ship in the canal that's just like so hard to unstick because it's so massive, which is something to think about. But I think really openness, flexibility, transparency are really important values to try to seek out from individuals, from organizations, when having conversations to understand how do we make progress? Because you don't just suddenly say, cool, done, I am now like not racist, or I am now not like inequitable, because the metrics can change and will change over time. So there's a commitment to that level, to a level of evolution that is constant, that I think is really important.
I had a question about, you know, you mentioned how, not, you didn't mention, but Kristen mentioned how you went to Japan to do like workshops and things like that. And if, you know, that experience made you grow as a designer, or, you know, how the experience was in general compared to the, you know, the experience in the US as a designer.
Yeah. Oh, I miss Japan. What the best place ever. Kendall and I have been there together before. And yeah, you know, I've taught a few workshops there, and that has been specifically about illustration and zine making and handmade crafts. And I speak Japanese, and I mean, to try to teach a workshop in Japanese was a real lesson in how well or not well, how good or how not good my Japanese is. And it's always a humbling experience, just navigating communication. And I'm pretty good, I can get by. And I think that the real education for me was finding similarities in nonverbal communication when it comes to illustration between strangers. We all worked on similar prompts together, and it was interesting to see the similar themes, you know, it was all entirely native Japanese folks that took the workshops. And it was really interesting to see how there were global themes that ended up in our illustration that we worked on together. So there was that, which was really affirming. And it was also affirming to see like what level of teaching a workshop in another language that I'm fairly rusty at, you know, how much we rely on that and the nuance of communication. I mean, I certainly couldn't have said everything that I said here today in Japanese or Urdu for that matter, and how we shouldn't take those things for granted.
About 13 minutes left. Jacob, was there anything that you wanted to ask Nishat?
Yeah, I'm curious. What is your biggest design challenge that you have overcome in the design industry, and has that helped you become a better designer today?
Wow, incredible question. The biggest challenge in design that has made me a better designer. It kind of goes back to that value of flexibility, actually. You know, I've been in the game a really long time, and the tools that are available now were not available then. And forget then, like the tools that are available now were not available 2 years ago. So it can be a challenge when you get really good at the thing that you do or the tool that you use, and then realize there's something else that's about to become the industry standard, or does become the standard, or there's a new platform that is the standard. And so I think, you know, a challenge is navigating, especially now because there's so many platforms to learn in terms of design tools and places to actually execute and that work to live. But staying flexible in learning all of that, having a learning mindset. I suppose, I don't know if that's my greatest design challenge, but I'm going to put it out there as one, because, and it kind of ties into everything else I've been saying, like you're just never fully cooked, you know, like, and always being open and willing to learn, whether that's tools or even like better ways of communicating, you know, tactics for communicating so that are effective, acknowledging power dynamics and trying to tear them down a little bit so that, you know, you're actually functioning in an equitable way. It's not a very granular, like visual design answer to your question. But I think that it's been really important for me to survive and evolve in the craft and industry of design, to be able to learn new things always and to be open to that.
I have a question that might be heavy. I don't know. Nish, do you have a moment where, it's like the cultural question, do you have a moment where you were made to recognize that you were not, you know, like not fit, that you were Indian, like in a corporation or in a moment of working or a client conversation where it kind of like hit you that, oh, these people don't see me as like an equal?
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna say something controversial back to you or like deep back, which is, I don't know that people know how to appropriately categorize me, and I don't know if I know how to appropriately categorize myself. I think that this like categorical mindset is, of course, one that is like both been a product of white supremacy in order for like whiteness to rise to the top and everyone else to sort of tumble down the hill at different variable speeds. Something that I experienced a lot in the last few weeks is just really interrogating how I am categorized as Asian, but I'm not necessarily seen as Asian. And so what does this categorization do? Like, so much of this is just inherently racist in itself, where like literally, if I asked everyone who's sitting in this meeting right now to close their eyes and tell me like, or think to yourself, like, what are the boundaries of Asia? You would all probably have a totally different idea. And so, have I been in a room and in a meeting where people like are not acknowledging my own cultural competency? Is certainly, but some of that has to do with just the lack of cultural competency in the systems in which we are provided. Yeah. Does
So
that
that
answer your
brings that.
question?
Yeah, well, that starts the next one. That do you have some level of like forgiveness in that sense?
I
Because
mean,
you understand that there's a lack of this competency across the board.
yeah, it's exhausting. I mean, it's like, yes, you like kind of have to, because we're just navigating through this world, and it is also exhausting. I mean, my mom is Hindu and my dad's Muslim, and people think that I'm Indian means that I'm Hindu, but my name is, Persian. And so like, there's not some people don't even think about that at all, that don't even know. And so what was the question?
The level, like, is there some forgiveness in just
Yeah.
that sense that, like, yeah, because it is.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's exhausting to be endlessly forgiving, but we also have to, because we all, like I said, are on different levels of learning. And ideally, I mean, I live in a world where like I have friends like you and Bijan and my own community where I feel safe and seen. And look, like we fuck up also, and
Yeah.
it is challenging to like go to work and have to like put on your armor to deal with that, and also deal with like just the feedback cycle of what you're, navigating at work about the actual design work. And also it's like, or, we're talking about health inequity, and are we even like thinking about the fact that like we're never going to get over COVID in India and some of our like ancestral homelands? And what does that mean to some of us who are like dealing with that every single day? Like, cool, vaccines, yeah, some of our families and some of the people in our ancestral homelands are like literally never going to get over that or get above that. So I think that the space for forgiveness is really important, and also very hard. And I don't blame people for not having that capacity, because it takes a lot of patience in order to have that.
I have a follow-up question, like a more specific form of that question, and something that I've been thinking about is, it's so hard, like you said, and at the same time, it kind of requires like a collective effort to change and to challenge and to let people know. And you were talking about this earlier, where like you would watch a movie 10 years ago and some of the dialogue or things they would say, it's like sexist and racist, and that stuff isn't being, as often used in movies now, and times are different. But I'm just curious, like, how do you approach these like intimate situations where like you're on a Zoom call and you're presenting work and everyone else is white, and someone says something, unconsciously that isn't appropriate? And let's say if you're not in a position of power where, like I run my own studio, I have to have projects and pay people. Like I constantly feel the sense of survival where I don't always feel like I'm in a position to be able to, because it's a really hard conversation, right? And I think that's what I'm trying to say is like, it's hard. And I think like we just saw that on, I don't know if it was The View, but the Osborne situation with that host, I don't know if you saw that, but like where people feel like they're being attacked if you like are trying to educate them or not correct them. It's just about educating, right? And I'm just curious like how you kind of handle these situations that I feel like I'm constantly in. And I'm wondering if you have any advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is where power is like most important, I think, or at least like if you are like I am, I mean, when I was a creative director and being an associate VP, am in a position of power to be able to advocate for the values that Instrument, cares about, and I care about, which are on the same plane. We want an equal, equitable, fair experience for everyone. We want everyone to be seen, heard, all of those things. We deeply care about that. There have been moments in client meetings where something happens, where something is said where it's like, ooh, what did you just say? That stung a little bit. And you can sometimes address that immediately, as in like, oh, that's an interesting, way of framing it. The way that we would normally approach it is this way, or like, typically that's not the language that we would use. We would do this, like just really coming at it with a solutions mindset, to be educating in the moment. And also just sort of like pivoting, like taking where that direction or that comment and really pivoting it into a place of progress, is a tactic to take on, in those moments. There are sometimes in those moments where it is not, where you can't address it immediately. And, if you are a leader, if you run your own studio, or if you are like a leader like myself, you can have a conversation with your client after. Also, something that's really important is like, if you are not in one of those positions, to be able to talk to someone on your team and say like, hey, did you notice that? I heard this thing, like, this doesn't feel right. And it takes everyone. It truly does. Because like I said, we all have different nuanced experiences. And hopefully people in leadership in your organizations can see most of those things, or some of them, or there's enough variety that can collectively see them. And, you know, I'm hoping that businesses are getting to a better place with that, which is of course like seating people of all different kinds of representation in leadership to help for that kind of advocacy. But if you are, you know, just coming out of school and are in a situation like that, you got to talk to somebody and say, hey, I name it. This is what I saw. This is what I felt. Either I need your help in understanding how we can navigate this, or I have ideas for how we can navigate this, or like, what are we going to do? But I think that formula of just being able to name it, speak to how it's affected you and or a community. If there's something that's being spoke that's for a community that's not represented, and you understand that that could be hurtful, being able to name that, and then talking about the next point of progress and process, or asking, what can we do about this? Because flagging risks in client relationships, in work, like, ooh, this design is actually referencing something that historically is problematic. I mean, that's really important. We owe that to our clients. We owe it to our design process. We owe it to each other.
Solutions based. Yeah. I think that's a great way of putting that, dealing with that.
And not everybody has to have a solution. Don't get me wrong. I think that it is very okay to just be like, this isn't working, you know, or this is hurtful, or this is harmful, or this could be hurtful, or this is inconsistent with sort of cultural progress in the like language that's being used. Anything like that is okay. Some people are just like, you know, identifiers, but if you can be like an identifier of this is an issue and at least attach, like, we need to figure out how to solve it. You don't have to necessarily have a solution, but at least like know that's the ellipses to the end of that.
I love this discussion because it's allowing for all different entry points into the problem solving. And I think sometimes when we're angry and we're hurt personally, as well as if you're in power and you have like folks that are depending on you, you feel it in this different way too, where you want to like fight for everybody. I think we all have parts of our life that we feel that way about, even if we don't consider ourselves a person with a lot of power. And you know, it sounds, when you say it that way, it sounds so liberating even to me to think about it that way. I imagine as a department head and a leader, like when you hear that somebody is saying we, like we're in this together and we're like, whatever that looks like, we're not all exactly in the same place, right? But the way you're saying it, there are different functions for calling things out and calling people in to work on it together. It activates me as a leader to hear like, hey, what are we going to do about this together? Asking questions is sometimes exactly what's needed.
And that'll hold your team and your organization to a standard that you have.
And you hold yourself accountable by saying that too. You're not just, as much as we want to, sometimes setting everything on fire, although there are days that feels
that'd be nice.
the right solution, right? But
all right, it's 1:30 in Nishat.
Yeah, it sure is.
So I think maybe that's a good spot to end. I mean, I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but Nishat has work to do. I mean, we all
wonderful being with y'all. My goodness, thanks for having me. This was really great.
Thank you so much.
So much insight.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Holler anytime. I'm around.